The first night on the mountain, the fire went out before midnight. I remember waking to the sound of Mary's teeth knocking together in the dark and thinking, in that confused second between sleep and fear, that something had come into camp. But it was only the cold. It had crept down off the ridge and settled over us so completely that even the blankets felt stiff. The embers in the pit were black. The coffee pot beside them wore a skin of ice. I rolled up from the ground with my hands already clumsy, cursing myself for letting the wood burn too low. The wind had shifted after sunset. I should have known what that meant at this height. Mary pushed herself up on one elbow beneath the quilt, her hair loose, her face pale in the ash-gray light before dawn. Sam was tucked against her, all knees and sharp little shoulders, breathing into the crook of her arm. "Jack," she whispered, trying not to wake him fully. "It's colder inside the bed than out." I know. It was a poor answer. I had many of those in those first weeks. I knelt in the frost and fed the pit with the last of the dry pine splints I'd shaved the evening before. The flame came reluctantly, as if even fire had to be persuaded to live up there. When it finally caught, it gave off more smoke than heat. The smoke hugged the ground, trapped under the weight of the morning air, and made my eyes sting. Below us, far down in the dark folds of the mountains, I could see a ribbon of river catching the first weak light. It looked warm from a distance. Everything at a distance had looked kinder than it was. We had come up into the Colorado mountains in late September with a wagon half full of tools, seed, flour, bacon, and the sort of hope that speaks plainly in a man's chest. I had taken one look at that south-facing shelf of land beneath the broken granite wall and told Mary we could make something there. It had timber enough within hauling distance. A trickle of water ran not far below. There was grass in patches for the mule. And best of all, nobody had yet made a claim on it because nobody with sense wanted it. That last detail should have given me more pause than it did. By daylight, the place showed itself honestly. The soil was thin as a miser's charity, dark in spots, but shallow everywhere, with stone crowding up through it as if the mountain meant to keep whatever little earth it had. I could not get the shovel down 6 inches without striking rock. Where I had imagined a garden, there was a scatter of stubborn ground and roots twisted hard as wire. Where I had pictured a cabin going up before the first real snow, there was only a slope that wanted everything to slide downhill. Still, a man does not bring his family that far and then admit to the mountain on the second morning that he has made a fool's bargain. So I worked. I cut poles. I dragged stone. I laid out the cabin footprint 3 different ways before finding one patch level enough that the walls might stand straight if the weather took mercy on us. Mary unpacked the cooking things and built order where there wasn't any. She always had that gift. A kettle hung, blankets folded, Sam's extra shirt kept dry, flour tied up against mice. These small acts were a kind of defiance. By noon, a camp begins to look temporary. By supper time, if a woman has put her hands to it, it begins to look like life. Sam ran the margin between usefulness and trouble the way boys do. He gathered cones for kindling, then disappeared long enough to make Mary sharp with worry, then returned, dragging a branch twice his size as if he had felled the whole forest himself. "See?" he said, breathless, dropping it at my feet. "I'm helping." "You are," I told him, and I meant it. He was 9 that year, all elbows and earnestness. He believed in every plan the moment he heard it. That was a comfort at first. Then it became a burden. A boy's faith sits on a man heavier than doubt. The days narrowed quickly after that. Sun on the rocks by noon, shadow before we were ready for it, wind in the afternoon, always. At lower ground, a person might lose track of air because it simply moved around him. On that mountainside, it announced itself. It came over the ridges with a long, dry hiss through the pine and struck the camp as though it held a grudge. It pulled heat from the wash water. It found gaps in our blankets. It carried off sparks from the cook fire and once nearly took the tent cloth before I caught the line. By the end of the first week, I had the cabin floor begun and 2 low walls half raised. By the end of the second, we had spent more nails than I liked and eaten more flour than I could ignore. The soil disappointed us first. The cold followed. Then the arithmetic. Mary had planted a small test patch in the one strip of ground that looked less stony than the rest. Not much, just a few onion sets, some turnip seed, and the last of the lettuce she thought might take if autumn lingered kindly. She knelt there every morning with her sleeves pinned back and her fingers dark with dirt, working crumbly soil around seed as carefully as if she were tucking a child into bed. Nothing came. Or rather, what came up came weak, pale, and insulted by the effort. Mary sat back on her heels one afternoon, staring at that poor little patch while the wind shoved at her dress. The mountains behind her were already blue with evening. "It isn't soil," she said. I kept shaping a sill log because I did not want to hear the truth, yet spoken aloud. "It's soil enough for grass." She looked up at me then, not angry. Mary was rarely angry in a quick way, but she had a level look that could strip a man down to the part of him that knew better. "We aren't grass, Jack." There are sentences that stay with a man because of how quiet they were when spoken. That night, we ate salt pork, fried hard, 2 biscuits each, and the last of the apples we had brought up wrapped in cloth. One apple had already gone soft at the bottom. Another had a bruise gone brown clear through. Mary cut away the spoiled parts and handed the clean slices first to Sam. "We'll have to be stricter," she said after he was asleep. I nodded. She sat close to the fire, palms turned toward it, though the heat barely reached her. "How much flour?" "Enough if we mind it." "That isn't what I asked." I hated when she did that, asked straight into the center of a thing. Hated it because I loved her for it. 3 weeks comfortable, I said. Longer if we stretch. "And bacon?" I looked at the tin. Mary understood before I answered. She lowered her hands and clasped them in her lap. The firelight showed the tiredness under her eyes. She had not complained once since we climbed into the high country. Not once. But a person can grow thin without saying a word. "We can still go down before snow," she said. The words sat between us, below us, down, away from the patch I had chosen, away from the labor already spent, away from the version of myself that had promised I could make a home out of rock and weather. Sam turned in his sleep and made a small sound from under the blankets. Mary looked toward him and then back at me. "I'm not saying we've failed. You're saying we may. I'm saying the mountain doesn't care what we hoped." No answer came to me then, either. The third week brought the first hard warning. It started as a bright morning, so clear the distant peaks looked cut from glass. I took the mule lower for water and deadfall, while Mary stayed behind with Sam to sort supplies and mend the canvas. By midday, the sky had changed without my noticing when it began. The blue drained out of it. Wind came hard down the draw, carrying grit and the sharp smell of stone. I hurried back with the load creaking behind me, already thinking about the half-built wall, the loose canvas, the bacon hanging too near the open side of camp. Before I reached the shelf, I heard it, a cracking report, then the heavy, scrambling roar of rock breaking loose somewhere above. I dropped the lead rope and ran the last stretch uphill. Mary had Sam flat against the ground behind the wagon. Dust rolled through camp in thick bursts. Pebbles pattered off the cookpot. Then fist-sized stones came bounding past, striking sparks where they hit. One smashed into the outer edge of the fire pit and burst apart. Another clipped the corner post I'd set that morning and snapped it clean. "Stay down!" I shouted, though Mary needed no instruction from me. The slide was not large, not the sort that wipes a camp from the earth, but it was enough to scatter half a day's labor, enough to teach us how little stood between our plans and the mountain's own arrangement. When it was over, the air hung white with powder. Sam's face was pressed into Mary's skirt. My half-built wall leaned outward, broken and ugly. The canvas roof we had rigged over the supplies had torn free on one side and flapped like a wounded thing in the wind. Mary rose first. She brushed the dust from Sam's hair. Then she looked at the smashed post, the shifted stones, the narrow scar of fresh rock above us. "We cannot stay exposed like this," she said. I stood there with dirt in my teeth and nothing in my hands but the useless coil of mule rope. She was right. Of course she was right. And for the first time since we had come into the mountains, I felt not merely tired or worried, but truly afraid. Because cold and hunger were one thing. A man can measure those. He can ration against them. He can work against them. But a place that wanted you gone was another matter entirely. The mountain kept dropping hints after the slide, and I was slow enough to need every one of them. I spent that afternoon resetting the broken post, dragging loose rock away from the fire pit, and trying not to look too often at the fresh scar above camp. It ran pale across the dark stone like a warning cut with a knife. Every time the wind rose, I found myself glancing up. Mary saw it. She said nothing while Sam was awake. She only worked beside me, shaking dust from the blankets, checking the flour sack for grit, setting our battered things back into order as if order itself might hold the slope together. But after supper, when the light thinned and Sam was busy feeding pine cones into the edge of the fire, she came near and spoke low. "You're listening now," she said. I knew what she meant. I should have listened sooner. She did not answer with comfort. That was not her way when the truth mattered. She only rested her hand once against my wrist, then turned back to the pot. It was enough. That night the wind came hard from the west. It struck the canvas in long, angry pulls, and made the mule stamp and toss his head against the tether line. I slept in fragments, waking to every flap and scrape. By morning, my jaw ached from clenching it. The fire had lived, but only just. Sam came out of the blankets with his hair standing up and his face pinched from the cold. "I hate this wind," he said. "So do I told him. It pleased him to hear me say it. The day opened raw and bright. Too bright. The sort of clear mountain morning that looks honest and still has bad intentions tucked behind it. I meant to go farther downslope for timber, but I did not want to leave Mary and Sam exposed beneath that broken wall, so I stayed close and worked on strengthening the camp. I rigged a lower windbreak with spare canvas and pine poles. Mary sorted what food we had left and made me account for it item by item. Flour, beans, bacon, coffee, a little salt, 2 onions gone soft at the neck, and 1 small sack of cornmeal. When she finished, she tied the mouth of the flour sack shut and said, "We cannot spend another week pretending this is enough." I was kneeling over the fire pit, setting flat stones around its edge where the slide had cracked the ring. "I know." "Do you?" I looked up. Sam was within earshot, poking at a beetle with a twig. "Yes," I said more quietly. She studied me for a moment, then nodded toward the ridge. "Then find us something better than stubbornness." That stung because it was deserved. By noon, the wind had fallen, though the air stayed sharp. Sam wandered farther than usual along the base of the cliff, while I cut notches in 2 new support poles. I kept half an eye on him, enough to see him stop, bend, and wedge himself between two fallen rocks where the slide had scattered debris below the wall. I was about to call him back when he shouted instead, "Pa!" There was a note in his voice that turned me upright at once. Not fear, wonder. I crossed the broken ground in 3 strides, and Mary came behind me, wiping her hands on her apron. Sam was crouched beside a tumbled slab of granite, his cheeks flushed, one arm thrust into a shadowed crack I would have sworn had not been there the day before. "Look," he said. "It goes in." "It goes nowhere," I said automatically. "Back away." But he did not. He twisted and pulled his arm free, and when he did, cold, damp air breathed out of the opening across my knuckles. Not the knife-edge cold of the wind, something steadier than that. Earth cool, stone cool. Mary felt it too. I saw the change in her face. The gap was narrow, little more than a black seam where the rockslide had stripped away a curtain of brush and loosened 2 boulders from the cliff base. Behind them was darkness. Real darkness, the kind that seems to wait. I knelt and cleared loose stones with both hands. Pebbles rolled inward, then vanished farther than they should have. The opening widened enough that I could lean my shoulder to it and look inside. At first I saw nothing. Then shapes began to separate from shadow, a low stone throat bending inward, not deep exactly, but deeper than any crack had a right to be. Sam whispered, "Is it a cave?" Mary answered before I could, "Maybe shelter." That word landed in me like heat. I fetched the lantern, though the daylight was still strong outside, and cut a pine branch to test the ground ahead. Then I went in first on my knees, turning sideways through the narrow mouth of stone while Mary held the lantern for me from behind. The rock scraped my coat and caught at my sleeve. For one breath I thought the passage might pinch shut and leave me wedged like a fool. Then it opened, not wide, not grand, but enough. I took the lantern from Mary and raised. The light showed a hollow chamber under the mountain, shallow at the front and rising a little toward the back, with a dry floor of packed stone and old dust above the reach of weather. The ceiling leaned low on one side and higher on the other. From a crack in the rear wall, water trickled down into a basin worn smooth in the rock. I stood there listening to that thin sound. No wind, no canvas snapping, no stones shifting overhead. Just water. Then Mary said from the entrance, very softly, "Jack." And for the first time since we had climbed into the mountains, I thought we might not be beat.